Today, you're going to learn how server actions work in Next.js. We're first just going to go over a brief overview of what they are and what are benefits of server actions. And then we're going to get into a full stack demo application to where we connect to a database and we actually see these working in like a more practical implemented situation. So you're going to get a chance to implement these and kind of get a better feel on how they work as well. So first off, looking at the Next.js docs here, with server actions, you don't need to manually create API endpoints. Instead, you define asynchronous server functions that can be called directly from your components. So if you need to add some data to your database, typically you might create an API endpoint within Next.js, and then you might make a post request to your database and so on and so forth. But with server actions, you can actually just connect them directly to your components and have these functions just work from your server directly to your database. So you don't really need to create these API endpoints. And it is super easy to do as well. And server actions, they can be defined in server components or in client components. Defining the action in a server component allows the form to function without JavaScript, providing progressive enhancement. And I have a podcast episode all on progressive enhancement, which I definitely recommend. But it's kind of the idea that by default, you want your application to still work, even if JavaScript isn't like enabled. So like worst case scenario, your application still works. And with server actions, you can actually still do that. And just a few other things that are good to note before we get into our demo application. Forms calling server actions from server components can function without JavaScript. So kind of mentioned that here already. Forms calling server actions from client components will queue submissions if JavaScript isn't loaded yet, prioritizing client hydration. Server actions inherit the runtime from the page or layout they are used on, and server actions work with fully static routes. So that is kind of what server actions are. And I think the main benefit here is that they kind of allow you to manipulate persistent data without needing to create API endpoints, and they are also pretty dang easy to use. So we're going to build a full stack application and implement server actions. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to Vercel, and let me actually scroll down a little bit so you can see my URL. So I'm at vercel.com/dashboard/stores. So I've created a free Vercel account, and now I'm going to use a Vercel database. So all I've done is created my Vercel account free, and then I've gone to the storage tab here, and now I'm just going to click create database, and I'm going to select Postgres, and I'm going to go continue, and I'm going to, of course, read all these terms and then accept. And then I'm going to call this grudge list because a to-do list is a little bit too boring. So we're going to build a list of grudges, and I'm going to go ahead and click create here. And also I did steal this grudge list idea. I think it was Steve Kinney on like a front-end masters course. So got to give credit where it's due. I thought it was funny. So we're going to do that as well. Now that I have this in place, we are going to, go through all these connection steps here. But before I do that, let's head over to VS Code. And what I'm going to do here within VS Code is I'm going to create a new Next.js project. So I'm going to do npx create -next-app at latest. And I'm going to name this grudge-list. Not going to use TypeScript, no ESLint. We are going to use Tailwind CSS, no SRC. We are going to do app router, and I would not want to customize my default import alias. So this is going to create this project. And then what I'm going to do here, once it's created, is I'm going to do file, open, and then open this project within VS Code. So I've now just opened my template project here, and I'm going to open my terminal, and I'm going to do git add, git commit -m, and I'm going to just say init project. And then we are also going to connect this to my GitHub. So I'm going to head over to github.com, and I've logged into my GitHub here, and I'm going to do create new repository, And I'm going to call this grudge list. I'll make this public. So I'll also link this in my description below if you want to see my finalized code. And then I'm going to click create repository. And then I'm going to copy git remote add origin and then the URL for this origin. And I'm going to paste it in there. And then I'm going to do git push. I'm going to get an error. And then I'm going to run git push set upstream origin main. And then that should have added that to GitHub. And then, yeah, everything's up to date. So I've just pushed this initial project up to GitHub here. So if I refresh this page, you can see I do indeed have my grudge list project added to GitHub. So now that I've connected it to GitHub, what I want to do is in Vercel here, before I click connect project here, I'm going to go to the Vercel dashboard here. So I'm going to refresh this. I'm just at my dashboard and I'm going to click add new. I'm going to do project and then I'm going to do grudge list. So I'm going to import the project that I just added to GitHub. Okay, so within your Vercel account, go to your dashboard, click import, and then you should see your application that we just added to our GitHub here. If you don't see this, you might need to connect to your Vercel to GitHub. It's super easy to do. I believe it walks you right through those steps. I would just do a quick Google search and it'll take just a couple seconds to do that. But I'm gonna click import here, and I'm just gonna click go ahead and deploy this, and it will deploy here in just a matter of a few seconds. But let's now go back to this database page, and now I'm gonna click connect project. And then I'm gonna select a project and I'm gonna select grudge list because I just added this project to Vercel. So now I'm clicking grudge list and I'm going to click connect. So I've now connected this to my project. And now we need to head back to VS Code and follow these steps here. So I'm going to first copy Vercel link is what I'm going to copy here. And I'm going to head back to my terminal and I'm going to run that command. And then it gives me this prompt to set up documents grudge list. I'm going to click Y and then enter. I'm going to click code Ryan Solomon. And then it found my project. I'm going to click Y and enter. And then it says it has indeed linked this to my project. And then I need to run Vercel env pull.env.development.local. So we need to pull the latest environment variables. And we're going to do this using this Vercel CLI. And we just pulled that in and we can see it added my environment variables there automatically, which is pretty cool. And then from here, what I need to do is I need to npm install at Vercel Postgres. So let's go ahead and npm install at Vercel Postgres. And then from there, we're good to go ahead and start using our database connection. So we've effectively connected our project to Vercel. Super easy to do, or pretty straightforward. You know, I know that when I was first starting out, this might have felt really kind of challenging to do, but after you've done this a few times, you really do get the hang of it. So we've now connected our database here, but what we want to do now is we want to create a table in our database so we can eventually use server actions to have a form in our project and then add some stuff to that table. So the way that I've decided to do this is within my app directory, I'm going to create a new folder. And this is going to be an API folder. And within my API folder, I'm going to create another new folder. And this is going to be called create-table. And the goal here is to create a route in which if the user visits this route, it will automatically create this grudge list table in our database. So if we visit /API/create table, we should create a table in our database. So I'm going to add a new file. And it's going to be a route.js file. This is creating a public route within our project. And within this route.js file, we need to import a few things. First, we need to import SQL from at Vercel Postgres, the library that we just installed. And then we need to import next response from next server. And then from there, we need to export an async function. And then we're going to call it get, because we're going to handle the get request when someone just goes to this URL. The browser will make an automatic get request when the user visits it. So we're going to say get, and then I'm not really going to use the request here, but I'll go ahead and just do underscore REQ. Typically, you might see an underscore for a variable that's not going to be used. So that's kind of what we're doing here. And then I'm going to do a try block here, and I'm going to say const result is equal to, and this is where we're going to write SQL to create our table. Now, I'm not a SQL master, but ChatGPT could kind of help you out with this stuff. So I'm going to do await, and I'm going to use this SQL library here. And then I'm going to actually use backticks. So SQL, and then immediately following that, put backticks. And then this is where I'm going to do create table, and I'm going to call my table grudges. And then I'm going to add one column to this, and it's going to be name. And that is going to be a var car field, and we'll put a limit of 255 characters. And then I'm also going to put a little semicolon following my SQL command here, right after this parenthesis. And then I'll put my JavaScript semicolon after that. And then if that is successful, then I just want to return a next response.json where my result is my result. And then I'll also just put a status is 200. But if that doesn't work and we get an error, I'm going to catch my error, and then I'm going to return a next response.json with my error message, as well as a status of 500. All right, so theoretically, if the user goes to this route of /API/create table, the browser is going to make this GET request here automatically. And then we should be able to use our Vercel Postgres SQL command to create a table within our database. So let's go to localhost 3000 here, right here. And then I'm going to close my console. I'm going to refresh. Actually, I need to make sure to actually run my application here first. So let me do npm run dev. So now it's running. And now if I refresh, I should indeed see my kind of default templated homepage here. And then if I go to /API/create-table, I should see some sort of result here, which is command create, so on and so forth. So I believe I've successfully created my table here. Let me go back to my homepage here. But now within my project here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the data row over here. And then it says choose table. If I click on this, I should indeed see my grudges table. And then if I click on my grudges table, I see I have, nothing in it because I literally just created this. I haven't done anything to, add data to this table. So we have successfully created a table within our Vercel database here. So step one is complete. But now from here, we want to start adding our user interface here. So I'm going to head over to my page.js file. I'm going to rename this to JSX just because it gives me better code completion here. And then what we want to do here is we basically want to add a form in which when the user submits the form, it adds a new grudge to our database, and we use server actions to do that. And you'll be able to see that, we did create an API route here, but that was just to create a table. That had nothing to do with server actions. The rest of this, we're not going to use any sort of API routes. We're just going to use some server actions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all of this. So we're just doing an empty return right now. I'm also going to get rid of this. What we're going to do here is we're going to add a form, but I'm also going to have some styles in Tailwind CSS. But I'm going to add these in just a little bit. I am going to just copy and paste those because I've already kind of done this project. But let's just write out the HTML first, and then I'll tell you how I would go about styling it if I were you. So let's first just add a div, and then within that div, let's add another div using very semantic HTML here. And then we're going to add a form. And my action here is going to be a function that is going to add a grudge. So I'm going to just right now say it's add grudge. We haven't created this function yet, clearly, but we will go ahead and create it. And it will be a server action is what we do here. But now that we have that in place, all we're going to do is add a label. And this label is going to be grudge name is what we're going to call it. And then we'll add some classes to it here in just a second. And I'm going to just say name of grudge as the text there. And then let's do an input here. It is going to be of type text. And then it's going to be name is equal to grudge name. And then the ID is going to equal grudge name. And then the placeholder is going to be enter grudge. And let me go ahead and move these down to the next line here so it's a little bit more readable and it doesn't go off my page. And then from here, we also want to add a submit a button. So for this, within our form, under our input, we're just going to add a button. And this button is going to be of type submit. And I'm going to just try to spell that correctly. And then that is all I'm going to add there. And I'm going to just say add grudge for now. And then we end our form here and we end our div. Now I am going to go ahead and add some styles here. Now you can either look at my final project and just paste the class names in to these divs, or you could also just, copy this HTML here, paste it into ChatGPT and just be like, hey, style this HTML using Tailwind CSS for my React application. And you can give it other prompts like make it this color palette, make it dark mode, make it light mode, do whatever you want. But I think that would be a very kind of reasonable thing to do here at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and paste those styles in here now, but you can choose either method. You can copy these from my GitHub, or you can go ask ChatGPT. So I've added all these classes here. So now what I think I can do, and actually right now I say I have add grudge, but I'm not referencing. I'm just going to put a string right now as add grudge, but I'm just doing this as a placeholder right now so we can see if this is working or not. So what I want to go ahead and do is let's go back to our Logos 3000 and see how this looks. So as you can see, we now have this form that it has name of grudge, enter a grudge, and the idea is that a user can add a new grudge here. They can click add grudge, and it's going to trigger a server action to then save data within our database right here. So let's go ahead and now create that server action. So we have this UI in here. All we need to do is create a server action and make it be this action right here. So I'm going to go ahead and create within my app directory, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this actions. And then within my actions folder, I'm going to create a new file, and it's going to be called create grudge.js. And then this is where we're going to add our server action. So for a server action, you do need to use the use server directive at the top of the file. Now, you don't necessarily need to put these in separate files. So to show you this in the Next.js docs here, within server components, you can, within that server component, you can put a use server kind of directive or a string at the top of a function, and this makes this a server action. However, in client components, you can't do this. In client components, you need to create a separate file, and then at the top of the file, make it use server, and then export that function from that file. And then within your client component here, you can just import your action and then place it as your forms action. However, we're going to use all server components in this demonstration, but I'm just going to use a separate file and still import those in server components, because as it says at the top here, in a separate file, client and server components, you can define multiple server actions and export them and use them within client or server components. So to keep things consistent, I think it makes sense to just always put it in a separate file. And then regardless of whether you're using a server or client component, you can just import it into those components. So that's what we have decided to do here. We've created a separate file here, and we've given it the use server directive. But now I'm going to import SQL from at Vercel Postgres, and then I'm going to go down and do export async function add grudge, and then it's going to accept form data, and then we need to get the grudge name from the form data. So I'm going to say const name is equal to form data dot get, and it's going to be called grudge name. And it's going to be called grudge name because that is what we've added for the name of our input here. Those are going to match. So if you called this something else, you do form data dot get, whatever name that you choose for your input name. And then from here, this is where we're going to directly manipulate our database with our server action. So I'm going to say try, but I'm first going to go if not name. Then I'm just going to throw a new error here, and I'm going to say grudge needs a name. But if we make it past that little check there, we're then going to await SQL backticks. And this is where we're going to write our SQL. So I'm going to do insert into grudges, parentheses, name. So insert into the grudges table. Within the name column of that table, I want to add the values, plural, of, I'm going to add parentheses here, $, curly brace, name. And this is where we are going to add our name into our SQL table. And then from here, we're going to catch any errors that occur, and we're just going to console.error that error, and then we're going to return an object that has a status of 500. But if everything is successful here, we're just going to return an object with a status of 200. And then now we can go back to our page, and instead of just hard coding this string here, I can do add grudge, import that right in here, and then that is going to be the action for this form. Now, as you can see, this is all done server side. So we have an input within our application that has, all this interactivity, but we don't even need to use client components to do it, which is pretty cool, which can make this a super fast application. So it's time for Judgment Day, I guess. Let's go back to our application, and I'm going to just refresh this for good measure here, and let's add a grudge. So what grudge do you guys have here? So I'm going to say when people chew with their mouth open. I cannot state that. So I'm going to click add grudge here. And nothing, we didn't see any errors thrown here, but we also don't see the grudge here. Now, this could still work and we wouldn't see it. And I'll explain that in a second. But to check if we just added our grudge here, let's go back to our Postgres dashboard here. And I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. I'm going to click choose table, grudges, and we see we have one row here when people chew with their mouth open. So we've successfully added this grudge to our database. But as you can see, I'm not seeing it here. Well, one reason for that is because we're not actually getting our grudges. So there's actually the fact that we don't get our grudges and render those out. That's one issue that we have right now. But we have another issue with caching, which we'll also cover. But now that we can see within our dashboard here, we successfully added this grudge. Let's go ahead and come back here and let's create just a little bit of UI here that actually renders out these grudges. So first off, what I need to do is I need to make this an async function here. And then I need to say const rows is equal to await, and I'm going to do SQL, but I'm going to automatically import that from Vercel Postgres or Vercel Postgres. I don't know why I said Vercel. So we've imported SQL, and then we need to write RSQL. So I'm going to do select star from grudges. So this is basically saying get all of our rows from our grudges. And then here towards the bottom, immediately right under our form here, what we're going to do is add another div. And then I also have some classes for this already, but they're super easy classes. So you could probably just type these in, but it's going to be class name MT-4 and P-4. So just a little bit of margin and padding. But then here we're going to do rows.map. And then I'm going to accept a grudge as well as an index. And then we're going to return, well, we're going to do another div here in which my key is going to be my index, which isn't always the best thing to do, but we're going to do it for the sake of here. And I'm also going to add just a few different classes here as well, which you can feel free to copy and paste in here. But then here, all we're going to do is grudge.name. So map over all of our rows that we got from our grudge list table, and then render those right here within our application. So if we come back, we see when people chew with their mouth open as a grudge added to our table here, which is pretty cool. Now, we still have an issue here, but let me go ahead and add another grudge. What's something else that bothers me? The mouth open thing bothers me quite a bit. How about when bikers come up behind me and scare my dog without saying anything, but I don't want to type all that in. So I'm just going to click add grudge. And now you see the issue. So we have the code to map over our rows here and then render all these out. But as you can see, we're not really managing any React state right here. So like there's no way for the state to get updated here and then re-render this page and see this automatically re-render here. So we're just seeing our initial grudge. We're not seeing both grudges. And if I go to our dashboard here and I refresh this page and then I click grudges, you see I do have 2 grudges, but I don't see them here within my app. But if I refresh my page here, you see I get my second grudge, and I did a hard refresh, which will clear my cache. And that's exactly what's going on here. So we're just showing our initial grudges. We are not showing our additional grudge that we added. So what we need to do is we need to revalidate this path. Now, you could also use revalidation by tag, which is a very similar approach, but we're just going to revalidate by path. And the way that we're going to do this here is if we get a successful result here, so we await this create SQL, and that is successful because we didn't enter our catch block, so we can assume it's successful at this line right here. I'm going to do revalidate path, and I'm going to import that from next/cache, and then we're going to put in the path name we want to revalidate. So it's just going to be our home page because we're just at our localhost 3000. We're not at any additional route here. So here, after we add one of our grudges, we're going to revalidate this path. So theoretically, after I add a grudge, we should clear that cache and we should see our new grudge show up on the page after that request is finished. So I'm going to just, for good measure, refresh this page here, but let's add another grudge here and let's see what happens. So as you might see in those suggestions, another thing is when people drive way too slow, so like under the speed limit in front of you, that is a little bit of a grudge-worthy thing for me. So I'm going to click add grudge, and that didn't work here because, as you could see, I added this revalidate path here within my create tables route. We don't want to do that. We don't need to add anything to my create tables route. So let's get rid of this. And we need to add it. We need to add this to our action. So let's go back to actions here. And then after this await right here, this is where I need to run revalidate path and then my home route. And I imported that from next cache. So this is the correct version. So here at this line 11, we can assume we've successfully inserted into our table here because we didn't enter our catch block yet. So this is where we can revalidate our home page. And I was kind of testing this because I saw that this broke and it was confusing me. So I have added a few different grudges here. And if I refresh, we should see another grudge. Yeah, another grudge. So that was me just testing this. But now we should see this work. So just to make sure I didn't confuse you guys, I accidentally added my revalidate path within my API/create table. You don't need to do that. That's not what I was trying to show. We want to add our revalidate path within our action because that's the action that we call right here. All right. So after we add a new grudge, we then want to revalidate our path. So if I come back here, I'm going to refresh again for good measure. And I'm going to say grudge, I don't know, like number 7. I'm going to click add grudge and we do see it added down here right away. And then let me comment this out here. And then I'm going to refresh my page. And then I'm going to say grudge and a bunch of letters. I'm going to click add grudge. You see it's not added because we need to make sure to revalidate our path after adding a new grudge. So now if I refresh and I do a hard refresh, I should see this. And then I'll just type in a bunch of letters again. And we see my grudge added right away. So that is how you can kind of revalidate your state after a server action runs. You can use revalidate path. You can also use revalidate tag as well here. But there's one other thing I want to show you. And that is we can actually access the kind of state of our form here. So after we submit the form, we can actually use a hook that will tell us whether the form is pending, whether it's successful, so on and so forth. But to use a hook, we need to make sure that that is within a client component because to use React hooks, we need to be within a client component to do that. But what we can do here is instead of having this button right here, I can actually make a client component out of this button in which we can use different form state using a hook that is automatically built in. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go within my app. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this components. And then within my components folder, I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call this submit button.jsx. And then here, this is going to be a client component. And then I'm going to import useFormStatus from React DOM. So import useFormStatus from React DOM. Then I'm going to export a default function, submit button. And then at the top of this function, I'm going to say const pending is equal to useFormStatus, like so. And then we can return. And then all I need to do is return my button here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, paste it in here. But let's also use this pending state. So let's go ahead and add aria disabled. Let's make this disabled if pending is true, make it disabled. And then also for our text, let's say if pending is true, let's say adding a grudge. So just using a ternary operator. And if that's not true, let's say add grudge. So here we're using a useFormStatus hook from React DOM within a client component in which we get the pending status from our form status hook. And since this is going to be a child of our form here, now this does need to be a child of the form. Like we couldn't use this useFormStatus hook outside of a form. That wouldn't work. It needs to be within a form here or as a child of a form, in which we're going to use that pending status to disable this button if it is pending. And we're also going to change the text to adding grudge when it's pending, else it's just going to be add grudge. So now, instead of rendering this button right here, I'm going to render out submit button from our components / submit button right here. And since Next.js, you can import client components into a server component, this should work just fine. So now let's go back here. I'm going to refresh for good measure. And then let's say testing submit button. And when I click add grudge here, we should, for a split second, see this change to adding grudge. And then since we use our revalidate path, we should see our grudge here below. So I'm going to do add grudge, and you see it switch to adding grudge for a split second. And now you see it down below. So if I do it one more time, adding grudge for a split second, and then you see test submit button 2 down below, and so on and so forth. So that, my friends, is your complete guide to using server actions within Next.js, using a full stack application here to where we at least created and read data from an actual persistent database that we connected to. And we're pretty much, we could have done this with only using server components like I showed. We just kind of added this submit button as a client component so we could use this form status hook here from React DOM. But hopefully this gives you a good idea on why server actions are pretty cool. I didn't need to create like any API routes or anything like that. I just created this action here, which is just a very basic function that adds some data to the database. So this all runs on the server, and it is pretty cool. It can, prevent doing too many network requests and slowing down your application. So thanks for tuning into this, and I'll see you in that next one.